How long do you want us to talk for?
We'll try and keep it under the hour.
I thought 10 minutes would be enough. Okay, so Helen.
Hello.
I'm Jenny. This is Helen, just in case you don't know. We're both deacons, and we just thought we'd tell you something about what being a deacon is.
Essentially, because we've done the interviews with both of you to sort of talk about how your calling has gone and things like that, this really is the point where I'm expecting it to be a video we can circulate around the connection to say...
Not till after I've been ordained, because it's rubbish. They might say I've changed our minds.
Essentially, I'm gonna sort of pre-phrase it with that bit from Lord of the Rings, where Gandalf says, "Deacons are peculiar creatures. You can study them for 100 years and still be surprised."
Excellent. Get Ian McKellen to do that.
So that's what I'm aiming for, just so that firstly the circuit knows who you are, and Julie, as she arrives, I think we probably are going to be the greatest concentration of deacons in the Methodist Church.
Probably.
And given that nobody really knows
what we do,
what you do, what to expect from deacons, then
even presbyters.
Well, yeah.
Mind you, even deacons don't know what we're doing half the time.
So to be able to send this to somebody and say, this might be useful for your church if you're thinking of hiring.
No pressure.
No pressure then.
So I've got in trouble, particularly with Helen in the past, for making a distinction between ministers and deacons.
Oh yes.
Now
happens all the time.
I've been very careful in recent interviews and conversations to make it presbyters and deacons, because that's the distinction that the Methodist Church makes between its ministers. So we've got presbyters, deacons, and lay ministers. What does it mean for you to claim the title minister as well as to claim that title of deacon? So to be part of that overarching thing and that specific niche within.
Deacon isn't actually a title. Deacon is the role. Like presbyter is the role. So we don't kind of have a title. Presbyters get called reverend is their title.
We are entitled to call ourselves reverends, but most of us choose to call ourselves deacon. So, but I think for me it's important because we are equal but different.
Yeah.
And when people say, "Oh, we want to speak to the minister of our church," or whatever, it's like saying, "Well, they're better." And yes, they may have pastoral charge, but actually it feels a bit derogatory to us to say, "You're not." It's almost like saying you're not a minister, and we are. But we have quite different roles. Ours is for service and theirs is for word and sacrament. But they blur. The two blur. I mean, I think it's insulting to presbyters to say they don't do service because they do. Yeah. And it's insulting to deacons to say they don't do word because they do. And in fact, they do sacraments as well. They just don't do Holy Communion. But it's also important to keep the distinction that the focus is in those particular directions. It is. This is our cross that Helen will get in a few weeks' time when she's ordained. And I haven't put it on because it makes a noise against the microphone, so it'll be there. So it's just saying that we are a member of a religious order as well as having a ministry, an order of ministry, a religious order and an order of ministry. So Helen, which do you think you got called to? Did you get called to both? The religious order and the order of ministry, or did you get called to one or the other?
I was called to the order of ministry. I didn't know anything about the other part of it until I looked into it, and then I discovered there was this religious order attached as well. So I looked into that, and actually it's it's really helpful because of the rule of life and the way that works. It's helpful. We've got the prayer handbook there, prayer diary, which has got all the deacons in, and they each get prayed for once a quarter, and that's really helpful. So yeah, it was the work first.
Yeah, I think I was the same. I met a deacon, and what they were doing in the community for the church was what attracted me and made me sort of say, yeah, that's what I want to do. That's what God's calling me to do. And then discovered the religious order and thought, ooh, that's not me. I'm not very like that. But actually, as I've gone through and been ordained and carried on with my ministry, the religious order is actually almost tipped completely the other way.
Really?
The religious order is almost more important. It's that rhythm of life, and whether it's being allowed to set time aside for praying and studying the Bible and being together in fellowship, and that's as important, if not as the actual order of ministry. So we're ordained to an order. Sorry, because we are ordained to a ministry of service. Although I think you're going to be ordained to a ministry of service and proclamation.
Yes, it
Do you
will
want
be
to say
service and proclamation. Now, you have to correct me if I get this wrong, but previously deacons did not have to be local preachers.
That's right.
They had to be worship leaders, but you could potentially be. Sorry, I'm just distracted by a big fat squirrel. But you could then go on and be a local preacher as well and be a preaching deacon. But now they've decided that we will be proclaimers. We're going to be the proclaimers.
Yay!
We will have a ministry of proclamation. So deacons will also do preaching, proclamation, however you want to phrase it.
There was a long conversation about what proclamation meant, because many deacons don't feel called to preach, but they do go into schools and they do schools work, or they go into community events and do things. So is that preaching or is it proclamation? So that's where I think the term came as a proclamation that we would do, so that those that felt called to preach were called to preach, and those that weren't could still be trained as preachers, so that they would have the theology behind it, but would go into other places. So the order, just to give you a bit of background information, there are about 300 deacons in total, so we're relatively small. About a third of those are retired. Some of them are called associate deacons. So they were people that were ordained, well, they weren't ordained as deacons, they were Wesley deaconesses, who then, when presbyteral ministry was opened up to women, transferred. So they have kept their connection with the diaconal order, but they are associate deacons. So we have about 150, 200 deacons in active service or as students. So we are not exactly rare, but when you put that across all the circuits in the country, that often means there's less than one deacon per circuit. So we're going to be really lucky, because we're going to have 3 deacons. Julie is joining us in September, working in the city centre, and she's got a blank canvas. She literally has got a blank canvas of what she's going to do in the city centre. So that's really exciting. And for us, we're going to rather dominate our area group, because we have area group about every 6 weeks, where all the deacons in a district meet up, currently on Zoom, but we're looking forward to it being over a cup of tea and coffee in people's houses. And our circuit will dominate.
It will, as it should.
Absolutely, the best circuit in the world.
It's interesting you mentioning the students that we've got training at Queen's College, where they train alongside Anglicans and presbyters. So it's when people are wondering what deacons are and what we do, the training is exactly the same as it is for presbyters. Actually, it's more. It's actually a little bit more, because we do diaconal seminars as well. But the training is exactly the same for both orders of ministry.
Yeah.
So
I think that was one of the things that came out when I was at college, is that presbyters arrived as local preachers, and they had done that theological training. When we arrived, we had the theological training of a worship leader, which isn't the same. and therefore there was a bit of catching up. But actually, the deacons did have to work harder because we had to catch up and then do the diaconal training on top. So, yeah.
I'd already done faith and worship when I got there, so I didn't have to do that. But we did have the extra diaconal seminars on top.
Yeah, and I also put a candle here because deacons give candles for everything.
Yes.
If you do anything, you get a candle. So you actually end up with a great pile of candles. Sadly, you missed out on your candle.
I'll get it at retreat.
You'll get it at retreat because you will get a candle when at convocation. Convocation is when we all gather once a year. But we send our deacons off for ordination and they will have a candle. And when they come back from ordination, they'll get a candle.
Oh, we'll get it too.
Yes.
Excellent.
And if you ever come to convocation as a guest speaker, you'll get a candle. So we do a lot of candles. Convocation. I haven't mentioned convocation. That's part of the. Well, it's an interesting thing because I'm treasurer. I know how it's split up. It's split into 3 parts. One of which is the business we have to do for the conference. A third of it's that. A third of it is our religious order business, and a third of it is Bible study, fellowship, fun. Bit of fun. So we meet for 4 days in May. We're a dispersed religious order, so we gather together for those 4 days, and it is compulsory for active deacons. And that, I think it's compulsory until you're 80.
It's about 80, isn't it?
Yes.
And then you don't have to go.
I think once you have sat down, you are more likely to be given a dispensation. But
yes.
But it's quite an interesting place. You've only been to one?
No, I've been to 2 live ones and then 2 Zoom ones.
Because when you first go, it's really scary. There's all these deacons that haven't seen each other for the whole year, and they get very excited and lots of hugs and lots of loud.
Yes.
But we do get serious as well. We do have to talk through some very serious stuff that's sent to us by the conference. We've done the ecclesiology and theology of the diaconate order.
Yes. The theology and ecclesiology underpinning the diaconate. I used that in one of my essays at Queen's. That's how I remembered.
Which was a big piece of work. And there's more recently we've been doing stuff on the rule of life because we've been asked to review it coming out of that report that Helen knows the but we do have some fun as well. There's usually some sort of
we do have a lot of fun
show, or we've done drumming on some years, and we did military marching at one point. That was quite fun. Seeing all these supernumeraries doing military marching.
Excellent.
But yeah, and although we will have 3 female deacons, there are male deacons as well. So Mark, you could become a deacon.
And as you go into those churches, into circuits in this role that you take on, whichever title you claim, what is it that churches have traditionally expected from you? Perhaps with that vision that, well, you're not quite real ministers, you're just deacons. What have churches traditionally expected of you? But also, what should we, as churches who are blessed to have 2, nearly 3 deacons, what should we be perhaps expecting or enabling you to do as you try and live out this calling?
That's a good question.
It is a good question. Actually, part of the ordination service, if I can find it, because I did actually put my things in here, is to assist God's people in worship and prayer and to hold before them the needs and concerns of the world, to minister Christ's love and compassion, to visit and support the sick and suffering, to seek out the lost and lonely, and to help those you serve to offer their lives to God. I think to hold before God's people the needs and concerns of the world is one of the important things we can do. We can bring into the church what perhaps people in our congregations don't see, some of the harder parts of life. It might be I'm thinking back to the stuff I've done about financial inclusion, understanding the depths of poverty, understanding the issues around payday loans, just bringing those into the church and helping people to understand that their normal is not everybody's normal. that people live in really difficult things, and it's not that they've chosen to, it's just that that's where they are. And I think it's important that our churches really understand what is going on in the world, and our role means that we're quite capable of actually telling them a bit more about that, and therefore helping them in their development and in their prayer lives. I mean, I don't know, I don't want to pick on any particular churches, but you know, how many people in our churches are really suffering from food poverty? And yet Helen and I can both talk about people who literally cry because they have no food. Now, or you know, somebody who's suddenly on their 9th pregnancy because they just have never had that sort of parental support that might help and guide them into ways of living differently. And I think sometimes it's just bringing that reality of some people's worlds to the attention of the church. And there are so many issues that you could do that. It might be environment, it might be all sorts of things. And it's not just deacons that do it, lay people do that as well. But we're in a privileged position because we are local preachers, or we do have that position of standing up and able to talk about it and to craft prayers around that, I think.
But also I think that that's true, what you've said, but also when you're working with a church closely like I do, they know their communities really well, and so they know what might be needed in those communities. For instance, the mental health cafe, and we work really closely with the ARC.
Yeah.
So the people in the churches can also, when I just got here, the people in the churches can tell me what their communities need as well. Yeah. So it works both ways, doesn't it?
It does. I mean, both my roles, because it's city centre, it's been slightly different. Yes. I tend to go out and talk about city centre stuff. So yes, I mean, you're quite right. It's experience, and again, my normal is not your normal.
Totally different. Yeah.
Yeah. So I've done 2 appointments. One in Leeds, which was particularly around the homeless and financial inclusion and things like that, and this one around the LGBT community and poverty. Deacons go into sort of places that the church on the whole doesn't necessarily feel comfortable, church congregations rather than the church. And I wonder what you've experienced on your placements.
When I was in Newcastle on placement with Deacon Gail Morgan, she did a variety of different things. There was Messy Church and toddler, mother and parent and toddler groups, and I think she did schools work, and then also lots of pastoral work and funerals and a huge variety of things. And I was with her for 5 weeks. And then since being here, obviously prior to lockdown, we had various plans to open up a mental health cafe at Phoenix Farm, and that had to be stopped, but we're hoping to start that up again. So there's a variety of things deacons do different. That's one of the problems with understanding of a deacon, I think, is that in that circuit, that deacon will do that thing, and the same deacon in that circuit will do something completely different.
Yeah. I mean, we've had deacons in the nighttime economy, you know, literally working in brothels and things like that. Yeah. So it's going to places where the church needs to be, but it's so diverse, you can't pin a person down. I mean, I've sort of been pinned down because in some respects, I've done city centre twice. So it's almost like, oh, Jenny knows how to work city centre stuff, but that's not the same for all deacons by a long shot.
No. And I think some deacons as well get almost a blank canvas.
Yeah.
To go in and say, right, do something with it. That wouldn't suit me. I like to be attached to a church and then work outwards from the church. So it's very varied.
Yeah, I was going to say, I was thinking of one deacon that went into Cumbria and went to live on a new housing estate where there was no church, and she bought a yurt, and the yurt went up on a Sunday, and they would do community events and what have you, and obviously you bring into that prayer and the idea of God, but it was actually more of started off as a community event, and then but she was always there wearing her cross, and the Bible was always there, and so it's a slightly different approach to a presbyter whose life to some degree is fixed by the services and the administration that goes with it. We have a much more flexible approach of where we go, and we desperately try not to get pulled into too much rigidity, the church pulling us into doing what they want. I think one of the sad things is that where we are called is often to areas of great need and great poverty, and of course there isn't the money therefore to pay for us.
Yes.
So we sometimes get called into areas that are have the money and therefore perhaps don't really have the need for a deacon.
Yeah, that can happen. I've heard other deacons saying a similar thing. Actually, that place there needs the deacon, but that place can't afford them.
Yeah.
So that's a shame that happens. And I wonder if that's something the Methodist Church ought to look at for the future. A circuit shouldn't be without a deacon just because of finance.
Yeah. I don't know whether it needs to be connectional organised or district organised, but I think there should be a somehow a pot. I mean, I'm lucky. My placement at the moment is paid for by connection, but that runs out next year, and then therefore the money's got to be found for me. And that's often also why the case is why deacons' appointments are relatively short. They're not always extended because finance just isn't there.
If a circuit was looking to appoint a minister, they know with a presbyter that they're called to word and sacrament. That's what they're going to bring to the church, and that's the impact it's going to have on them, kind of in the building on a Sunday or midweek or whenever that service happens. What I'm hearing from you is that perhaps what a deacon brings is that challenge or that experience of the community around the church, and that the church should be challenged to move into that with you and to sort of engage with the community around them, be it in prayer, be it in worship God, be it in petition, in seeking social justice. And I think that's a really important thing for the church to be challenged to. But if a circuit was looking at appointing a deacon, what would be kind of the exciting things that they should expect?
They should not expect to get an assistant. They should expect to get a minister in their own right, and they should expect to get somebody who might challenge. And when they, if you're working in a church environment, if they say it might be helpful if we did this sort of thing, that the deacon would then say, okay, that's great, I'm going to need you to help me do that. They shouldn't expect the deacon to just do it. Part of our role is to enable people. So we'll need people to help us do the role. And they need to expect that we are different to presbyters. We have different focuses, and we are privileged because the presbyters do have an awful lot of, I want to say, the politics of it, the church councils and the property things that we to a large extent can avoid. We do go to church councils and things, but it's basically the presbyters' role to look after all of that, which must be a nightmare for them, I think. We are blessed that we can avoid that to a large extent.
Yeah, I think it's right. I think we are there to challenge. I think we are there to surprise as well. I think sometimes we can come up with things that might shock or surprise congregations. I've always worked almost as a lone ranger, which is it's actually quite a hard thing to do. So I haven't had a church to call on for people. So actually being part of this circuit is quite exciting, that I will actually have more people to call on to help out with some of these things. But I think it is, we don't do things the normal way. We're much more likely to say, have you thought about doing it differently? Have you thought about this particular part of your community that you might not have seen, but I've seen because I'm walking around? Or we can bring people into the church who might shock because their stories would be shocking. And I think we sit on that sort of fence. We're both looking into the church and looking out into the community very much. And I think for most of us, our primary focus is looking out. We want to take the church out rather than having this thing of we've got to fill the pews. Actually, it's more about people's walk with God that's important to us. So yeah, it's difficult to tell you exactly what we do. I mean, would you like to say what you do at Food Bank? What your role is there?
What my role is? Well, it varies. Sometimes I'm dating up the tins of beans in the church.
I know that one well.
Sometimes I'm doing the packing of the bags. Obviously, through lockdown, we haven't been able to let people in the building. Ordinarily, there'd be a cafe and people could wait. So we get as many bags ready as we can, so that if somebody comes, we don't have to keep them standing outside for a long time. Yesterday, I got given money to go to Tesco's and buy cleaning stuff so we can make up cleaning packs. So that was great. I went round Tesco's with my trolley, a big shop. Sometimes I'm meeting people outside and having a chat. Just depends what's needed, really. But it's a good piece of work, the Food Bank.
It is.
It's shocking that we need them, but it's a really valuable piece of work.
Yeah, I mean, at Bridgeway Hall we have the Food Bank and we have what's called Sunday Supper. And part of my role there is to actually stand outside because it's a takeaway service at the moment because they can't come in. And part of my role is to stand outside and talk to people. And it's amazing what stories people are prepared to tell you, knowing that you're a deacon, but you're not necessarily there in clerical work, clerical stuff. They know you're attached to the church, but you don't seem quite as formal as perhaps a presbyter is seen. So they'll tell you all sorts of intimate stuff that you sort of think, oh, I wouldn't have said that to an almost stranger. And they actually do ask to be prayed for, which I think is extraordinary. And that just goes to show that people are spiritual and we need to go where they are so that they can express and talk about their faith without that scary thing of having to come across a church boundary. One of the best things I did when I was at college was to do the interfaith module, and I did it in the Gurdwara, and I hadn't realised how scary it was to go into a place of faith that I didn't know what I had to do. You have to take your shoes off, you have to wash, all these things. And it occurred to me that people have to do that into our churches. We have a set way of doing things and we don't even know we're doing it.
That's right, yeah.
All this standing up, sitting down, kneeling. Well, we don't kneel in the Methodist church, but we do all sorts of things. And unless you know what you're doing, it's quite scary. So to be able to go to people where they are and gently, shall we say, walk alongside them as they come to understand what church is. We at Sunday Supper before lockdown, we were having a worship service, and that was great. It was a really scary place to be because they didn't behave, because they're all unchurched. They didn't behave like a congregation, and they said, "Well, what do you mean by that?" She just wants me, or they couldn't read the words off the screen because they were illiterate. And how do you do worship in places like that? You have to be creative. And I think that is one of the exciting things, that we're allowed to do that and we're allowed to make mistakes. But as long as we are bringing that word of God to people in whatever way.
Yeah, it's about not making assumptions about people, isn't it?
Yeah.
If you can meet that person, wherever it might be, it doesn't have to be in a church building, and you can have a huge impact on them. It doesn't necessarily mean getting bums on seats in a Methodist church. It's about helping people to meet Christ.
Yeah, and helping people in their times of need. I mean, we had somebody recently with a funeral. Now, they didn't want me to do the funeral, they didn't want the church for the funeral, but they just wanted to talk through what the funeral meant. And how they might feel and what they could have in a funeral. Now, I know that happens across churches as well, but sometimes just doing it in a shopping centre is their place. That they felt comfortable.
If they're comfortable there, that's,
Yeah.
it doesn't matter, does it?
Yeah. So I think we are very fortunate that we are privileged to do that. It doesn't mean it's not a scary place to be.
No.
There have been times when I've been accosted in the city centre and with some extraordinary questions that are unrepeatable from me.
They're the ones we want to hear.
No, you really don't. But surely we should all be in a position to talk in real words that people understand about ourselves, about what we do. I mean, a number of people I find that look at the cross and say, "Oh, that's lovely. Could I have it like this?" And I'm thinking, you're just going to take down the porn stop. But it's a symbol. It's almost a symbol that is less threatening than a bit of white plastic around the neck. Now, I know you wear a clerical collar, and I wear a clerical collar at times because it's so complicated to explain what a deacon is. A little bit of white plastic around your neck tells people that you're clergy. Yeah.
Yes, it doesn't sign you as a Methodist presbyter or a Methodist deacon or a Catholic priest. That collar just tells people that you are some flavour of Christian minister. So that you can be assumed to be a safe person. So I do find it helpful to wear that often because, like you say, people don't know what a deacon is.
No.
I
tend to wear it on city centre functions. So if I'm going to something where, I don't know, I'm meeting the mayor or the sheriff or something like that, I tend to wear it at those sort of occasions.
The sheriff of Nottingham.
I've got pictures of me with the sheriff.
Excellent.
She didn't have a bow. I was really upset. She was wearing a wig, a bright red wig. But it was Pride that day. So that's when I tend to wear it, when it's sort of, we're representatives, but I don't tend to wear it if I'm just doing the day-to-day stuff, if I'm meeting people. Because I think that can also be quite off-putting, because it puts up a barrier.
Yeah, can do.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, I think there are many things that we do that we don't actually realise we're doing. We just, because we are deacons, we do it. It's part of our nature. The golden towel is here because that's the symbol of the diaconal order. It's not it doesn't belong to us. It's not exclusive to us. It's just a symbol that we have taken about our ministry of service, and I think it's quite a precious symbol for me. I know some people aren't over fond of it, but I think it's quite a precious symbol because it's not about servitude. But it's about serving because Jesus served us, and it's about us serving, and using Jesus as a model to serve others.
Yeah.
Although I don't wash people's feet.
No.
If somebody was considering being a deacon, not me, but if somebody was considering it, kind of what signposts should they be looking for in their kind of gifts, and kind of what God is saying to them? What should they be perhaps aware of hearing, or aware of what they are equipped to do? And if you had to pick 3 words that described that sort of character that the diaconal order would kind of look at and say, that's one of us, what would it be?
3 words.
I think compassionate would have to be one of them, for me. I think somebody who can listen and listen well would be another.
Yes.
And maybe creative, because sometimes you have to think of a solution to something which suddenly hits you and you sort of think, well, what am I going to do about that? So those, I think those might be my compassionate, listening and creative.
Definitely listening. Yeah, I could go with that. I think you need to be, you have to have a certain amount of empathy, and you've got got to be non-judgmental as well, which is quite hard because you do tend to, you make assumptions. But when you're talking to somebody at the food bank, just because they've got a nice coat on, it doesn't mean that they're not in hard times. So, yeah, you've got to be non-judgmental.
I'm going to add another one. I might add a fourth. I think you've got to be quite hard-headed as well. I think you've got to actually sometimes say the truth to people that might not want to hear the truth. So yeah, you've sometimes got to actually be quite hard.
I'm not
with a soft heart.
I'm not agreeing with that because I'm not ordained yet. But after I've been ordained, possibly I'll say the same thing.
Yeah. No. What the rest of the question was then?
It was what sort of spiritual gifts or skills might people recognise in themselves that would be sort of most useful to understand as a calling towards diaconal order or ministry?
I think very few people are just recognise their calling as a diaconal calling. They know they're called for something, but they don't know what it is to start off with. Some people are very much called to the religious order, and so therefore they look around. They're a Methodist and they feel this need for a religious order, and they'll either go for something like Iona or Northumberland, and then they'll discover there's the Methodist diaconal order, and then from that outworking they think, yes, I want to be a deacon, and the service part is there. I think the majority of people do get called to the order of ministry. And I think it's probably just a slow process of seeing that God works in you, and you suddenly find you're doing these serving roles within the community anyway. Yeah. And then somebody says, "Have you thought about being a deacon?" And you go, "What's a deacon?"
Yeah. Exactly
and then
what happened to me.
And then once you've seen it, there's no going back really.
Yeah, I don't know that I would think of anything specific that made me think, oh, I can do that, so I should be a deacon. It's just that process of thinking, am I called to something? What is it? And then I think if it's presbyteral or diaconate. You look on the websites, you look at what the work is, you look at what you feel you're comfortable doing. I could never preach every week.
I know, could I?
I couldn't do it. And some presbyters are preaching twice on a Sunday. And I just couldn't do it. So I knew that whatever I was called to wasn't presbyteral, because those key things, I just couldn't do them. So then I looked at the diaconal website and I thought, oh yeah, I could do that. I don't necessarily mean I could do them well, but there were things that I was comfortable thinking I could do that. And then if it's right, it fits. So if a presbyter was to look on the diaconal website, if they were thinking, should I be a presbyter or should I be a deacon? It wouldn't feel comfortable for them. They would look at the presbyteral side and think, yes, I'm more comfortable doing those roles. So I think it's a brilliant thing that the Methodist Church has these two orders of ministry, because they're both valuable, and the best way to get value out of both of them is for them to work together. Yeah. When we work together, that's when we work best, I think.
Yeah. And that's why I'm so excited about what we're doing in North East, because we're going to have 4 presbyters and 3 deacons. I mean, that's an amazing balance. You'll go to some of these super circuits where there's, 10 or more presbyters with maybe 1 deacon, if that. Yeah. And I think we will be a good experiment almost on how this is going to unfold. What will be the result of this? And I think we learn from each other. I mean, I learn from our presbyteral friends all the time, and likewise I hope they'll learn from us as well. Certainly that's been my experience, but then I'm a bit mouthy.
They're learning not to say ministers and deacons, so that's a start.
But then even the connection do that sometimes.
Absolutely,
we get letters out saying ministers and deacons, and you just bite your tongue. I think one of the things as a deacon, you learn which battles are worth fighting, and when you first become a deacon, you get really precious about ministers and deacons. By this stage you think, oh, I've lost that one, it doesn't really matter. Well, the battle I will always argue is, when will you become a proper minister?
Yes.
That's really frustrating.
Someone asked me not so long ago, am I being promoted to a presbyter when I get ordained? No.
Well, I had the Bishop of Leeds ask me, as I was a deacon, whether I wanted to be ordained at a service when he was ordaining an Anglican deacon. So, no.
Thanks very much.
I also had my brother asking me what were my promotion prospects? Would I become an archdeacon? That's my brother all over. What's your promotion prospects? You know?
Yeah. Does he involve a pay rise?
Yeah, quite. Yeah. So, I mean, I think the only predictable thing about a deacon's life is its unpredictability. You just never know what's coming up next. And that's quite exciting. I mean, we've been really frustrated or I've been really frustrated, and I think you have too, because our work is so face-to-face. We haven't been able to do it. So the next year, I'm really excited about getting back out and talking to people. I mean, I was out in the car all day yesterday, apart from staff meeting and CLT, meeting people. And I thought, oh, this is what I love doing.
Yeah, I did a pastoral visit last week, and it was lovely. Just being in someone's house, having a coffee, just talking about, stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's good to be out and about. And you must feel that, getting back with your young people.
Yeah, but this isn't about me. Last one then. Let's assume that I'm editing this bit out and it won't actually go like national. Okay.
National.
Let's assume.
Be on the BBC.
Let's assume that conference won't see this. What do you want them to hear? Like, what would you like your presbyteral colleagues to hear about who you are as an order, as a ministry, that you kind of want them to hear to help that collaborative work to really be the best it can be?
For me, I want to say that God's kingdom is everywhere. And that if we get too pulled back into the church, we restrict God. And that the diaconate are in a unique position to go out into places that are difficult, that are uncomfortable, and that we really do need your help, because we can't do it all. We need to have the help of the people in the churches. Be that prayer, be it practical support. But actually we need to get out of our buildings into God's kingdom, because unless we do, there will be so many people who can't hear the word of God. And that for me is what it's about. Our ministry is to go out and spread the good news. And people need to hear it, particularly at this time. There is such a need and loneliness and emptiness in people's lives. And we're in a position that we can go out and offer something. And that's what I would like people to hear.
I would like there to be something in place where the circuits that can't necessarily afford an extra member of staff can dip into the pot and get a deacon if that's what they need. And I don't mean get a deacon because they don't think they'll get a presbyter. But if there's work that needs doing, that there's somewhere they can go and get that funding for a deacon. Because often it's, as we said before, the circuits that can afford them, then they don't necessarily need them. So I would like to see some kind of funding put in place that circuits can go to that pot. We'd like a deacon, please. That's the money for it. Yeah.
And I think there's also an element to which I would say we're not in competition with each other.
No, not at all.
We're very much alongside each other. We just have different roles. And I sometimes think that it feels like presbyters are concerned that we are in competition with them. That's not our plan.
No. You couldn't have a circuit without presbyters, because so much of the stuff that they do is vital. You can't have a circuit without a deacon. That's debatable, but you can. But I mean, you would never get a deacon that was a superintendent or a chair. So presbyters are very much vital to the church, but we can be as well. And like I said before, we work best when we work together. as a team. I think we work really well as a team in this circuit.
We do.
We've got you and Kath as lay ministers, and then presbyters and deacons all working together, and it works well. That's the goal for Connection, to have deacons in every circuit.
Maybe I'll just leave that bit in or include it as a separate, like, just memorandum to conference. Thank you for your time.
You're welcome. If we've picked on presbyters, cut that bit out.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't think we have.
You haven't mentioned CPD yet.
We don't mind about CPD.
What's CPD?
That's the thing that just you look at. How much
Calls
holiday
buckle.
entitlement are we allowed?
How big should my man's be?